I'm Mark Halperin.
I'm John Heilemann, and with all due respect to Roger Goodell, see, it's not so hard. All right, happy National Rocky Road Day, sports fans. In our lineup tonight, the Florida Chatter, the Bernie Matter, and the end of Sepp Blatter. But first, a primary or a caucus? Nevada chooses the latter. The state legislature has ended its session without voting on a bill that would change the state's 2016 presidential caucuses to a primary. Mark, who wins and who loses from this preservation of the status quo?
It's a huge lose for the establishment, both in Las Vegas and in Reno and in Washington, D.C. It's a huge loss for Jeb Bush. It's a huge win for Rand Paul. I think today, I'm not predicting this, but I think today Rand Paul is positioned, if he reaches his potential, to win the first 4 states. That's a big deal. He will be the favorite in this caucus now because he'll dominate caucuses if he reaches his potential.
Wow. I know you're not predicting it, but I got to tell you, I would give you some very, 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 very big odds that Rand Paul will not win all 4 of the first 4 contests. But there's no doubt in my mind, Mark, that you're right, that not just Rand Paul. As you know, caucuses are all about organization and all about identifying voters that haven't necessarily voted in the past, finding core supporters who are really enthused and really committed. The people who have organizing strength and our ability to work on the ground benefit from caucuses. Rand Paul is one of the ones who has that possibility. This certainly makes Nevada much easier for him than it would have been in a primary system.
And he benefits particularly because this state has no history. This is an event that Harry Reid created to help his party. There's no history of turnout. Turning people out in caucuses is tough. They do it decently in Iowa because they've got a tradition there. Right. This event probably would be poorly run, poorly populated in terms of turnout, and I think it's possible that other candidates won't even try to play there, particularly if Rand Paul comes into the state voting after the first 3, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, with a head of steam.
Right. You remember the famous Nevada caucuses on the Democratic side back in 2008, one of the more corrupt caucuses or voting exhibitions that we saw in that
Let's
cycle.
call it problematic.
Well, problematic. Okay, corrupt, problematic, a lot of different things. But that was mainly because of the fact that you could pay off the unions to show up for you. On the Republican side, you're going to have a lot of Hispanic voters, but the unions aren't going to be in play. So it makes for a much more complicated organizational game than it does on the Democratic side. As I said, anybody who can, you're going to have to start organizing that thing today if you're going to have a chance of winning, and that puts Rand Paul in a decent position.
He will compete there vigorously, not clear anybody else will, to me, at this point.
Right.
Big win for Rand Paul, bad for the establishment. Today, Walt Disney World, the happiest governor of Florida, Rick Scott, has been hosting some of the usual Republican prospects for president. They all spoke serially at something called the Economic Growth Summit, and they used the stage at the fabled Yacht and Beach Club convention to flex their fiscal muscles. Here's the highlight reel.
We have to fix one of the most convoluted, complex tax codes by lowering rates and eliminating as many exemptions as possible.
The great thing about the fair tax, and I think you guys are going to love this, we would eliminate, I mean literally eliminate, the Internal Revenue Service, the biggest bully in America.
We need to rein in the regulatory environment, whether it's the EPA or any number of others out there that are like a wet blanket on job creators and innovators and entrepreneurs and others out there. We need to pull in those federal regulations.
You know, is there really a family in Florida tonight who's sitting around the table saying to each other, you know, honey, if our daughter could just get a higher minimum wage, my God, all our hopes for her would be realized? That's not what families aspire to. And so they can argue about the minimum wage all they want. That's around the edges. We should be talking about growing opportunity for people to have a real career that they feel good about.
John, in this great big Republican field, which is as large as Space Mountain by some estimates, who has the best economic message?
Is there if this is a multiple choice test, could I pick whatever the letter is for none of the above? Looking at that, it's a little unfair. It's TV. Those are only excerpts. But I heard we got to cut taxes, we got to roll back regulations, and we got to not raise the minimum wage. That sounds to me like Republican economic dogma and doctrine for the past 20 or 30 years. We are in a new world right now, and the Republican who comes forward with a new kind of economic agenda about economic mobility, about social mobility, that's the Republican I'm looking for. So far, I am not hearing it from any of them.
I agree that the guys who were there today and the others who weren't there are hopelessly and sadly behind where they need to be. I think the person with the strongest message today is John Kasich. He's got a record in Ohio. He does have some private sector experience, and he talks pretty well about the new economy and education as compared to some of the others. Jeb Bush, who might be the guy, put out a video today talking about his jobs record in Florida. If that's the kind of video they're going to use to change people's impressions of Jeb Bush, good luck to him.
Terrible.
Did not seem to me like a revolutionary thing.
I agree. Look, and Marco Rubio is another guy who has the potential of offering a forward-looking economic agenda. He has not really done it yet on the campaign trail. I'm really waiting to hear from him. Let's move on to the next topic, though, which is the Bernie Sanders movement, which is growing, rolling down the railroad tracks like a locomotive. Bernie went on Seth Meyers last night. He also spoke with Katie Couric yesterday. And today, he told Andrea Mitchell that he is an internet sensation. Mark, yesterday we talked about the big crowds that Sanders drew over the weekend in Iowa. But this is not just about numbers. It's not just about crowd. It's about hip. It's about trendiness. It's about cool. It's about chic. How potent is Bernie chic, I ask you?
To use the most ridiculous cliche in political journalism, Bernie is now a rock star. And I don't want to overstate it because we saw a version of this with his fellow Vermonter, Howard Dean, in 2004. Big crowds, logos, young people all excited. But I got to tell you, this is, for the Clinton folks, I think a little bit of deja vu all over again, because this is what Barack Obama was like on a different scale, but the same thing, where he could go on late night, seem cool. And I got to tell you, you and I both have talked about being impressed with different aspects of Bernie Sanders' skills. He gets why people think he's cool. He knows how to leverage it. It's a dangerous thing as his momentum continues to grow.
You know, we talked about this the other day in just a casual conversation. I'm embarrassed that neither one of us predicted that this would happen a few months ago. This guy has authenticity, and he's on the left. And if you think about the way that Ron Paul was a bit of a rock star with young voters back in 2012, on the left, Bernie Sanders stepping right into that same niche, and he's just killing it right now, killing it.
And with the exception of Rand Paul, there really isn't anybody on the Republican side who's drawing crowds like this or has that new media capacity and that late-night TV capacity. So watch Bernie chic. All right, one news note, late breaking on Capitol Hill today. The Senate has just passed a new anti-terrorism law, or bill, rather. It's a compromise that also curtails the NSA surveillance in some ways. Senate voted 67-32 to revive key parts of the Patriot Act that expired yesterday after Rand Paul vigorously tried to stop things on Sunday. The Senate did defeat some amendments supported by Mitch McConnell. Now the measure heads to President Obama's desk for his signature. All right, one last topic. The Dr. Evil of the international sports world, Seth Blatter, is exiting stage left, literally. They held the door open for the guy today after he announced to FIFA and the world that he's stepping down shortly as president. Blatter, of course, not named in the FIFA indictments brought by the U.S. Justice Department last week, but many people had hoped that those arrests would lead to his departure one way or the other. Now ABC News reporting that Blatter is being investigated by the FBI. John, FIFA is filled to the brim with practitioners of the dark arts. How much will Blatter's departure change how FIFA is run?
I said the other day on this show, Mark, that the fish rots from the head down, and so now the head has been lopped off, and there's some chance at least that the fish could grow a new head. This is not going to automatically fix FIFA by any means, but there's no doubt that without Seth Blatter at the top of it, with Seth Blatter still at the top of it, real reform was not possible. Now real reform at least is possible, especially if these indictments go forward and all of FIFA gets cleaned up by Loretta Lynch.
There's no reason why this has to be a corrupt organization. To me, the best thing would be if the new leadership comes in and maybe reviews the decisions that were made by the past leadership, including maybe where the World Cup was awarded. But I think the world needs to rise up and make sure the new leadership is better, because it was ridiculously corrupt. And I got to say, if those people who were arrested, if they're successfully prosecuted, it might change the culture, because people don't like to go to prison.
You know, there was a Washington D.C. mayor who once talked about coming into D.C. with not with a broom but a shovel. That's what people are going to need to come into FIFA with, a shovel, and clean out the Augean stables there. It's going to be a big job to clean up FIFA. But as I said, this is at least the indictments were the first step. This is the second step. Hope springs eternal for soccer fans worldwide. Coming up, the former emperor of the Empire State and the second most recent Republican to jump into the 2016 presidential race, George Pataki, is here after the break. All Our guest tonight is running for president, which means he's going to be in Iowa and New Hampshire, and obviously here in our studio, former New York Governor George Pataki. Thanks for coming back on the show. Governor, you probably read in Jerry Seib's column today in the Wall Street Journal that populism is the flavor du jour in both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. He noticed there's a lot of agreement on some issues on both sides of the aisle. We're going to show you some video from Republicans and Democrats talking about some issues, and then we're going to ask you for your reaction.
That's fine.
So let's start here with Lindsey Graham and Hillary Clinton talking about entitlements.
We depended on Social Security benefits to survive. As president, I'll gladly do what it takes to save a program that once saved my family. We have to fix entitlement programs to make sure people who need the benefits the most receive them.
Let's just kind of take a deep breath here as a country and say, okay, we're going to have a retirement issue, and people who've worked hard deserve to have enough security when they retire so that they can have a good quality of life. And so I'm 100% committed to that.
Yeah, you're already shaking your head. I didn't even get a chance to ask the question, but go ahead. Bring it on.
That's a pretty radical position to say that they're in favor of keeping Social Security. I mean, they must have taken a number of polls, but it's shocking to me. I don't think there's going to be anybody in America who says we should not take care of people who have worked hard in their old age and that we have to protect Social Security. Not exactly controversial.
Right, but the question is how, right? So when you look at so for you just talk a little bit about what you would do, real quick. What's
on
your
Social Security?
Yeah, so on entitlements in general.
On entitlements in general, you have to look at them to make them sustainable. Let me just give you an example on Medicare. I am against the high income tax rates, but I'm not against raising deductibles and raising co-pays for people earning $250,000 a year who are on Medicare. I think that's perfectly appropriate. On Medicaid, I am in favor of what Bowles-Simpson recommended, block granting it to the states, letting them restructure it for what works best with the states. I think there are solutions out there.
All right, let's bring Mark in here.
Okay, Governor, I want to play you one more of these. Again, we want to hear your views, but let you listen to some of your colleagues who are also running for president. This is Ted Cruz and Martin O'Malley talking about Wall Street.
My criticism with Washington is they engage in crony capitalism. They give favors to Wall Street and big business, and that's why I've been an outspoken opponent of crony capitalism, taking on leaders in both parties.
Recently, the CEO of Goldman Sachs let his employees know that he'd be just fine with either Bush or Clinton. I bet he would. Well, I've got news for the bullies of Wall Street. The presidency is not a crown to be passed back and forth by you between two royal families.
So, Governor, you were the governor of New York, where Wall Street obviously is a big deal. What's your view of the proper role for Wall Street in our economy, and whether there are any excesses there that as president you'd like to see restrained?
I think there are tremendous excesses there and everywhere. And really it starts with the lobbying power in Washington that has dramatically created a tax code that is incomprehensible. Just two things I'd do, Mark. First of all, I'd have a lifetime ban on any former member of Congress ever serving as a lobbyist in Washington, D.C. I don't want Goldman Sachs or I don't want the teachers union hiring my senator when they retire or lose and peddling their influence instead of looking to help the people who sent them to Washington.
Governor, if I could, just specifically on Wall Street, what do you think of the role Wall Street plays in our economy, in our politics today?
I think it has far too great an impact on Washington and particularly on our tax code. And that was point two, Mark. I'd throw out the entire tax code, the lobbyist-written I think it's 74,600 pages of special interest protecting gobbledygook. Throw it out. Get rid of those loopholes, those tax credits, those special breaks, whether they're for Wall Street or some other organization. Lower the rates, simplify the code, get rid of former legislators lobbying, not just being against crony capitalism, everybody is, actually doing something about it.
Governor, you have a bunch of issue positions that are would make you somewhat unique in the Republican field, particularly on social issues and some domestic issues. I want to talk about guns with you for a second real quick. You signed a very a pretty sweeping gun control bill in this state. In New York today, we just saw some statistics that came out that gun violence is rising dramatically, or at least worryingly, here in New York City. The NRA did not like that bill you signed.
Right.
The NRA still has a lot of power in your party. How are you going to talk about guns as you go out on the campaign trail?
You know, John, I've always believed the states are the laboratory of democracy, and what we were doing at the state level are things that I believed we had the authority under the Second Amendment to do. At the federal level, it's totally different. Now, I don't think they should change the gun laws in Washington at all right now. I think they should do two things. One is enforce the existing laws better, because, for example, it's illegal to take guns across state lines. The criminals running them from the South do that constantly. And then mental health. Most gun violent, the horrible incidents are people who are mentally ill and haven't gotten treatment.
You know it's the case, though, that the NRA, although you make that distinction between state and federal, the NRA does not see it quite that way.
I understand that.
Are you worried about their influence? You worried about what they're going to say about you when you campaign?
I worry about what I believe. There are people who are going to support me, people who are not. You do your best.
Okay.
Governor, do you believe the woman's right to an abortion is a constitutionally protected right and should be?
Well, it is right now because of Roe v. Wade, and the Supreme Court has said that it is.
Should it continue to be, in your view?
Well, I'll tell you what I believe is that we should not be trying to pass a constitutional amendment in Washington. What we should be doing is following Roe v. Wade, and to the extent there are things where states want to disagree within the restrictions that the Supreme Court has put on them, there's no reason why New York and Texas have to have the same laws.
Real quick, on gay rights, you've been a big advocate of gay rights, or at least signed a bill in this. Gay marriage, I know you think it's a state issue, but you're for it?
Personally, I'm not for it, but I do believe that if states choose to have it, that's their prerogative. That's the way the Constitution works. That's the way our government should work.
All right, Governor George Pataki, thank you. When we come back, bad news for Hillary Clinton. Our brand new poll wizard breaks it down. Joining us now is a new contributor and analyst at Bloomberg Politics. He's a professor at the University of San Francisco and an expert in political advertising and polling. Ken Goldstein, some big new polls out today. So let's start with Hillary Clinton, Ken. Her support has dropped 9 points in a new CNN ORC poll, and another by ABC and the Washington Post. Her favorability rating has dropped. In these polls, you can see her losing strength or support on issues like whether voters find her honest and trustworthy, as well as whether they think she cares about people like them. So, Ken, my question for you is, among these numbers, which are the ones that should most worry the Clinton campaign?
Well, I think the number that they're probably focusing on the most is the cares about people like me. Listen, you'd always rather have your favorable number higher than lower, and her numbers have been going down since she left her position as Secretary of State. And you'd always want to be thought of as honest and trustworthy. But I think with Hillary and maybe the Clintons in general, there's some honest and trustworthy, or lack of honest and trustworthy, baked into assessments of them a little bit, where they've always made their living is caring about people like me. And so I think they're probably focused on that number, and if that number goes down, that's what's going to worry them the most.
And Ken, do you think that's a problem for her in the Democratic nominating context, or just in the general election context?
You know, I think it's more towards the general election contest. I think you had a very good discussion of Bernie Sanders as a rock star, but I don't think we're yet at the point where we think there's a real high likelihood that she's not going to be the Democratic nominee. Things may evolve over the next couple months, but I'm really looking at these numbers, and I bet the people in Brooklyn are looking at these numbers as general election concerns.
Yeah, I bet you're right about that. All right, let's look at Jeb Bush now. In that ABC Washington Post poll, Jeb's support among Republican voters fell 11 points since March. But here's the thing. At the same time, when pollsters ask general election voters how they like him against Hillary Clinton, he's closing the gap from 12 points a couple months ago down to now within the margin of error. So, Ken, what does this tell us about the strengths and weaknesses, perhaps, of Jeb Bush's campaign strategy?
Yeah, it's like, when your kids were in kindergarten, they had opposite day. It's like Jeb Bush's problem is the exact opposite of Hillary Clinton's. It looks like he's going to have some trouble, a lot of trouble, getting out of his primary. He's gone down. His favorability numbers among Republicans have gone down. But in the general election, he's actually looking pretty good. Although his general favorability numbers, even as we talk about Hillary declining, Jeb Bush are still even lower than that. Yet he has closed the gap in the general election contest. It's interesting. Republicans will come home to the eventual nominee, and when you ask them these horse race questions, they are coming home. The question for Jeb Bush is, can he even get to that point?
Ken, I want to ask you about another poll, the latest installment of the Bloomberg Politics Des Moines Register Iowa poll. We looked at the top issues in both parties for Iowa voters. Republicans said things they cared about, economic issues like the budget deficit, job creation, and taxes, also very high on the list at the top, national security. Social issues did not rank high. So, Ken, if these issue preferences hold up, which Republican presidential candidates do you think benefit the most?
Well, if they hold up, and if we believe that's going to be what the people who actually go and attend a caucus believe, it's going to help a more establishment candidate like a Jeb Bush. I'm a big fan of your Iowa poll, and that would be the poll I'd be paying attention to now, even more than these national polls. That said, at the end of the day, we've been around a lot, and I think we first met at Iowa caucuses many years ago. The folks who show up on a cold February night tend to be those very, very hard social conservatives.
All right, finally, also from our Iowa poll, top two issues that both Republicans and Democrats said they cared about were job creation and immigration. Same question, if those two issues are big, who does that benefit?
Well, it's interesting on immigration. It's one side cares about it because they want reform, and the other side cares about it because they don't want reform. That's one where I think Jeb Bush just wants that to go away.
Yeah. All right, Ken Goldstein, we're happy to welcome you here, and we're delighted to say that you'll be with us throughout this year and into next year as we cover the polling and a whole bunch of other stuff that you are amongst the best in the business at analyzing. Ken, thanks.
Ken, you are a welcome addition to our team. You're a welcome addition to our team. Thanks for doing this today, and we'll be right back.
Another big day in politics tomorrow. Lincoln Chafee announces his candidacy for the Democratic nomination. Then Thursday, Rick Perry expected to announce he's going to be the Republican nominee. John, two more entrants.
They just keep on coming, Mark. They keep on coming. I would compare them to lemmings, except that would be a little unkind. Lincoln Chafee, a former mayor, governor, and senator, who almost no one thinks has any chance of beating Hillary Clinton, but maybe the sharpest thorn in her side over foreign policy. And, of course, Rick Perry, who's looking for redemption after not having performed anywhere near to his potential back in 2012. He's a formidable candidate if he's on his game, but we didn't see much of his best game last time around.
Our scouting report of Lincoln Chafee will be on BloombergPolitics.com tomorrow. And then, again, we'll have live coverage right after, with all due respect, tomorrow night. You'll see Lincoln Chafee's announcement, and then live coverage anchored on Thursday, Rick Perry's announcement.
We are only on the television a half an hour a day. We are live 24/7 on BloombergPolitics.com. Until tomorrow, sayonara, folks.